Hello, welcome to this educational program by the Association of Foreign Press Correspondents in the USA, AFPC USA. Today, foreign journalists will learn, understand, and interpret the Sustainable Trade Index 2023 Hinrich Foundation findings. In today's dynamic economic and geopolitical landscape, we are witnessing a shift from an era of rapid globalization to one of trade fragmentation and rising protectionism. How this age of fragmentation transformed global trade and economic policy, as well as sustainability practices. That's what we are going to find out today with the Hinrich Sustainable Trade Index from last year. This program is developed in partnership with Hinrich Foundation. Our guest today, I would like to say hi to Christos Cabolis. Welcome, Christos. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hello, Patricia. It's so nice to be back here again. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. Christos Cabolis is the chief economist at the IMD World Competitiveness Center. He's also the head of operations at IMD and an adjunct professor of economics and competitiveness. Cabolis joined IMD from Alba Graduate Business School at the American College of Greece, where he was an associate professor of economics and finance. Prior to Alba, he was the executive director of the International Center for Finance at Yale School of Management. From 1997 to 2002, he was a lecturer of economics at Yale University, where he was served as Dean of Jonathan Edwards College. He has also taught at the University of California at Santa Barbara and the University of North Carolina Kenan Flagler Business School, where he was visiting associate professor of finance in 2010 and 11. Cabolis' teaching focuses on courses related to business economics, macroeconomics, corporate finance, financial management, and industrial organization. A research fellow at the International Center for Finance at the Yale School of Management, his research focuses on issues related to mergers, the evaluation of changes in corporate governance, and measuring market power. Currently, he works in topics related to the effects of rating agencies' valuations, the interplay between competition and specialization in venture capital firms, and the optimum size of banks. He has been published in the Review of Financial Studies, the Journal of Law and Economics, and the Journal of Banking and Finance, among others. Cabolis has been awarded grants by the BSI Gaiman Foundation and the Sloan Foundation for his research. He was also the recipient of the inaugural Jane Fernandez de Araoz Award in Corporate Finance. He holds a BA from the University of Athens, an MA from California State University, Long Beach, and a PhD in economics from the University of California, Santa Barbara. Christos, again, welcome. Thank you so much for being here with us. We have your presentation so we foreign correspondents can understand more about this index and how we can use those numbers and findings in our daily work. So welcome again, and we are glad to have you here with your initial presentation. And just after that, we're going to open for some questions from our audience.
Yes, good morning, Patricia. Greetings to the people who are with us today. I'm very honored to be back in your program and discussing about something that is very dear to our rankings that we produce here at the IMD World Competitiveness Center. Special thanks to you, special thanks to Thanos, who was arranging this whole endeavor. People who see the final product rarely know all the intricacies that it is behind that. But speaking about intricacies, let's leave the intricacies behind and let's go to the topic of our discussion today. So let me share my screen. And what I intend of doing is, as you said, to briefly take about 15 minutes explaining what exactly is the Sustainable Trade Index, what we try to accomplish along with our very good partners, the Hinrich Foundation in Singapore, and what we can learn from that. And when I say what we can learn, I include us centers, both the Heinrich Foundation and the World Competitiveness Center, because indeed every year is something new that we are learning from this particular ranking. So what do we try to measure here? What we try to measure is the capacity, the readiness of 30 quite diverse economies to align their trade policies with long-term objectives, the long-term objectives of economic development, of societal development, and environmental protection. And in this group of countries, we include the APEC members, we include the CPTPP members, that is the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Transatlantic, Trans-Pacific Partnership. APEC is the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, and then the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, the RCEP members. We also have the Ecuador, which is an applicant to the SPTPP. And we also have some very important players in the East Asia market, and that is Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka. We capture 71 indicators, which we allocate in 3 different pillars: the economic pillar, the societal pillar, and the environmental pillar. And I will say in a second what exactly we try to measure with these 3 pillars. But first, let me give you a map representation so one can understand what exactly, where are the economies that we try to study. And you see that they span essentially Asia, Oceania, and there is the connection with the Pacific Ocean between the North America and some countries of Latin America, South America, and Asia. The countries that we study is small in number, 30. However, they represent about 69% of the global GDP. And they represent also 63% of the population of the world. So we are focusing in major components of the economic value and the demographic issues. And just to give a representation of what the rankings are, this is how, in the end of the day, after we use the pillars that we will discuss and after we employ the 71 indicators, what we find is that the ranking is topped by New Zealand, and then second is the United Kingdom, then is Singapore, and Hong Kong, and we go the rest. I will share this presentation with you, and therefore you can have it in the website, so people will be able to follow this much easier. We said that we are using 71 different criteria, and we group those in 3 pillars. So the first pillar is the economic pillar, which measures the ability of an economy to promote economic development through international trade. In essence, what we try to do is we try to link the economy on the one hand with a trade system on the other. So what are the indicators that we use here? With respect to the economy, are variables related to inflation, investment, variables that are related to growth in labor force, growth of GDP. While when we're speaking about a trade system, essentially we try to see what is going on with different barriers of trade, both tariff barriers and non-tariff barriers. We try to see what is the position of each country in trade liberalization, trade costs, and of course, export concentration, both in terms of the countries exporting and in terms of the goods and services exporting. And when we rank the countries in the economic pillar, we get that in the high positions, we have Singapore, South Korea, Hong Kong, United States, United Kingdom, and so on and so forth. What I would like to take a moment and say is what we find that is common ground for the countries that rank highest in economic pillar. And these are robust infrastructure, countries that have strong commitment to technological innovation, and they have adequate financing, which is very, very important. Of course, they are quite liberalized with respect to trade. Trade liberalization essentially captures issues like regional trade agreements or capital account liberalization, investment freedom. So these aspects, we believe, provide a more liberal trade environment for the economies. And finally, there are economies that have very low trade costs. Low trade costs meaning low costs in logistics, low corruption levels, which is very, very important, and a very strong rule of law. On the other hand, in the countries that perform poorly in this pillar, and there is room for improvement, of course, are countries that are negatively affected by inflation this past year. They have very slow economic growth. They have high foreign trade risks, high logistical costs, and they have a very slow liberalization of trade. So these are restrictions in some ways for cross-border transactions. And this is what we capture in the economic pillar. The second pillar is the societal pillar. And this captures social factors that contribute to an economy's capacity to trade over a long period of time. And in that respect, intuitively, what we try to capture is two issues. The one is the development of human capital, a very important ingredient in the well-being of the economies. And the second is whether there exists or how we can introduce public support for trade. So with respect to the development of the human capital, we measure aspects like educational attainment, labor standards, life expectancy at birth, and of course the health infrastructure of the country. With respect to public support for trade, we are focusing mostly on different types of inequality. Income inequality is very, very important. We try to capture whether we have goods that are produced by modern slavery, how the government responds to human trafficking, and of course, political stability, which is very, very important in this respect. And when we put all these criteria together and we measure the societal pillar, we come up with a ranking where Canada, New Zealand, Australia, United Kingdom dominate the top positions. And in the low ranked positions, we have, of course, countries like Bangladesh, Pakistan, India, Papua New Guinea, and Myanmar. At the top, the areas where we see these countries excel are issues related to political stability, issues related to economic equity, Gini coefficient. We measure uneven economic development, which tries to capture the differences that exist within a particular country. High educational attainment, of course, education is an extremely important component in this ranking and other rankings that we produce, as a matter of fact, and social mobility. As you can imagine, in the lower part of the ranking, we see the opposite. We see low political stability. We find uneven economic development. We have limited social mobility and low educational attainment, and also low life expectancy. The last pillar that we try to capture is the environmental pillar. And here, essentially, we try to measure the extent to which an economy is engaging in environmentally sustainable trade. In essence, what we try to capture is an environmental stewardship, if you may, of natural resources that an economy has. While before we were discussing about human development, here in many ways we discuss about environmental capital development. And the environmental capital has, again, two big components. The one is what exactly an economy does now. And the other is what does a country undertakes for the future. So we have issues related to what a country does now are issues related with air pollution, water pollution, deforestation. So what exactly a country does with respect to the existing natural resource pool that it has. When we try to capture how it will behave in the future, essentially what we try to capture are environmental standards, are carbon emissions, and of course the share of natural resources that are included in the trade of a particular economy. And when we put all these things together, we end up with the ranking that you see in your screen, where New Zealand, United Kingdom, Mexico, Philippines, and Singapore are the 5 most important economies, while in the lower end, we find countries like Pakistan, Taiwan, India, Brunei, and Russia. Now, what connects the high-ranked economies is basically their approach towards high environmental standards. These high environmental standards dominate this pillar. So what exactly an economy does with air pollution, with wastewater, treatment of wastewater, with carbon emissions, with energy intensity. So these are the things that essentially are a common ground for the countries that perform very well, while on the other hand, what we see is a very high share of natural resources in trade and low environmental standards that the countries that perform poorly have. So I will stop here. I just want to say that if people who hear this program would like to find more, they can go either in the website of the Heinrich Foundation or in the website of the IMD World Competitiveness Center, and they will get the rankings along with different other information, articles, and so on and so forth. So let me stop sharing my screen, and I look forward to hear your comments and insights, like questions.
Perfect. Christos, why this index is so important to society from your perspective?
I'm sorry, why?
Why this index, all those findings, to have access to those numbers, and we as foreign correspondents, we with those informations, of course, we are going to construct our stories to inform society. Why those findings are so important to society itself?
This is a fair question, and it's a very important one. I think we understand more and more that climate change is something that it is with us. And we understand also that in order to address the issues related with the environment, we have to have a more holistic approach. And when we're speaking about sustainability, essentially we're following the 17 sustainable development goals, which are extremely important. If one tries to find why do we have different opinions, why do we see sometimes a lot of tension among different issues, one particular challenge that we have is that we do not have enough data and we do not have very clear measurements on what we try to accomplish, neither on the way of how we define things, nor on the way of how we measure things. So Heinrich Foundation had started this exercise several years ago. And about 4 or 3 years ago, we got involved as well. And we started thinking about how we can enhance the great endeavor that the Heinrich Foundation undertook. So what we try to accomplish is to provide a benchmark and provide a framework within which economies will be able to think some very, very important points. An additional reason why this is important is that because the pillars that we use, the economic, the societal, and the environmental, are not working on the same direction. Their interplay is not linear. So it's very, very complex. If, for instance, we accomplish on performing very well in the environmental pillar, this particular accomplishment in the short run may be accompanied with higher costs with respect to the economy. So we need to balance the trade-off that exists among all these components. And we hope that this is what we provide. We provide an additional element for people who would like to both understand, comprehend, and maybe make policy recommendations to have a framework to work with.
If foreign correspondents were our audience, if they have to take one perspective to write or to talk about all those findings that you just explained to us, which one you understand or you think it's the most important to take a look? What do you suggest? A perspective.
Something that it is something that is clear in our ranking in the Sustainable Trade Index, as well as in many other rankings, the rankings that we produce in the World Competitiveness Center, is that there is not really one size fits all. So there will be a completely different important issue to discuss about New Zealand and United Kingdom, for instance, and a completely different important issue to discuss about for countries like China or India, and yet another issue to discuss about Brunei. If you think about how they use, for instance, natural resources, if we are speaking about non-renewable resources, countries that have a lot of access to non-renewable resources, that will be a tremendous benefit. Countries that have a tremendous issue that they need to address, so Brunei, Russia, countries that rely a lot on oil exports. How do they diversify their economy and therefore their trade with respect to the non-renewable resource? The opposite holds if we speak about countries that have a lot of natural resources that are renewable.
Mm-hmm. Let's have a deeper look into New Zealand, and the United Kingdom, for example. We already spoke about them. What makes them top 2 positions in the overall ranking? You already spoke a little bit about this, but if we can have a deeper look in those countries, what makes them better than others?
So essentially, you identified two countries that in every pillar that we spoke, they share some of the highest positions. And in essence, what they do is both countries that have a very good understanding of what's going on with respect to the environment. Especially New Zealand, for instance, is very, very focused on that. And they have a very good program with respect to the societal pillar. With respect with the economy, the UK performed very well last year. New Zealand was working very, very well. But in both of these countries, issues related to the standards of the environmental standards are extremely important, and issues related with the societal pillar.
Is that what makes Singapore, Hong Kong, and Australia perform so well too?
Indeed, yes.
So, and if we look on the other side, countries that are not doing so well, they are in the last positions. You spoke in your presentation about that we have room for improvement of those countries, for example, and you gave some examples of what makes them perform not so great. You spoke about inflation, trade risks, high logistic costs. Could you explain a little bit about those factors and how each of those topics have a huge influence in a not good performance?
Indeed, of course. So with respect to trade costs, the logistics is an aspect that started becoming a very big part of our lives the last few years. Essentially because we had both governments and the private sector rethinking the trade-off between efficiency, that is low costs, and what exactly is going on with respect to resilience in operations. If we think about, for instance, everything starting with the US-China trade wars. And then we had the pandemic, where all of a sudden supply chain costs started increasing. Countries took a step back, and companies did exactly the same thing. In the past, the probability of having something related to trade wars was very low. All of a sudden, it started appearing. Then we have a random event, the pandemic, which essentially changed substantially the whole map of moving things around supply chain, how you move the value of a product from different countries, from the producer to the final consumer. If we add to that the geopolitical risks, that all of a sudden the probability of them became positive a couple of years ago and increases every year by more. So all of a sudden, what do you have? You have also another particular element that comes into the picture, which is national security. And therefore, there are two issues here. The one issue is with the simple trade costs that one has. These are related, as we said before, with the logistic costs, the corruption, which is independent, but also requires a lot of work, the rule of law. This is one aspect. And then if one starts seeing what exactly is going on with the cost of production, so China for many years was the low-cost producer, which this China-centric approach is not actually present anymore. There are other countries. Vietnam tried to capture a lot of these aspects in the beginning of the pandemic. India as well, which has also the scale component that can substitute the China. So these change the cost of the supply chain. But going back to your question, because I think I brought the big picture. So so what do we have? The implications of that were high costs, and I gave a very brief explanation of where we see these costs coming from. The inflation was something that several economies experienced. Looking back, not to the level that we felt or people were considering that inflation will be so bad that we may go into recession. Actually, we did not have a recession last year, yet there were countries that saw different costs increasing because of inflation, and this affected the trade and affected the consumer preferences.
Taking into account the geopolitical risks, as you mentioned here, while answering the last question. So considering the geopolitical risks, which you already explained, and you spoke about national security, if we look into the societal pillar and we take a look in the countries that are not performing so well in that area society, we see Bangladesh, India, Papua New Guinea, and China and Russia. China and Russia, they got the 5th and 6th worst positions in this pillar society. So is it related to the geopolitical risks or crisis regarding Russia, for example, the war, the invasion of Ukraine? This is one, and how this bad performance in the societal pillar affects trade in those countries.
So yes, as we discussed, what we try to capture in the societal pillar are issues with respect to economic equity. There are issues with respect to high educational attainment, social mobility. So in these countries, we see low performance in these particular indicators, in all of them. It's true that Russia especially received a lot of negative impact from the invasion to Ukraine. But this may be thought more in the economic pillar, in the sense that how did the Western world reacted, that is Western Europe, North America, and Australia and New Zealand, essentially by imposing different sanctions. Sanctions are in some respect non-tariff barriers. So essentially what they managed to do was to increase the cost of trading goods that Russia was exporting until then. And because Russia was a major producer of different commodities and energy, and Europe can talk a lot about that. Of course, by imposing sanctions, Russia suffered, but also some recipient countries of these goods suffered as well. So yes, with respect to the societal pillar, there are some implications, and these implications go more with respect to social mobility, to what exactly is going on with the educational framework that these countries have, what exactly is going on with the uneven economic development within the countries. And then I would say that the implications of the high geopolitical risk are more towards the economic pillar.
Understood. Another question here, Christos. The index shows that countries with robust infrastructure and strong inclination towards technological innovation stands out. How countries not so developed in those areas can correct or achieve a better performance, in your opinion? Is this something more related to a change in the private or public sector? talking about infrastructure and strong inclination towards technological innovation?
So more and more we realize that an economy manages to increase the prosperity of the citizens, so make people better off by actually having a partnership between the public and the private sector. Because there are things that the private sector can solve, there are things that the private sector can solve, but also there are elements where both a partnership of both public and private sector can produce better results. It really depends what we're discussing about infrastructure, but the infrastructure, it's not only tangible. We have the infrastructure that is related to roads and bridges and buildings and so on and so forth. But also we have the infrastructure related to technology, health infrastructure, the environmental infrastructure. These are areas where essentially what you need is a very strong partnership between the two sectors of an economy. And therefore, and by the way, going back to your very good question, in order to accomplish something like that, you need a longer period of time. It's not, for instance, all of a sudden that one economy will be able to completely change the educational system. This takes time, and not only takes time, the fruits of any change will appear several years down the line, after 10 or 15 years. However, credibly undertaking certain paths, this immediately boosts confidence, not only to the people within an economy, but also people who are outside the economy. What we see is, for instance, things that can take place by using foreign direct investment. And foreign direct investments will require a certain environment of high credibility and good infrastructure. The beginning of a good infrastructure.
Why technology and health, as you said, are not tangible aspects comparing to constructing roads, for example?
Because what you need over there is a mix of talent, high-skilled talent, good regulation, and of course, adequate financing in order to be able to start having innovation and therefore having the technologies, the implementation of possibly of the innovation plans and therefore the technologies. So you need different dimensions that go towards producing that.
It's more wide, and it takes more time, it looks like. And then we are going to the next question, which I think it's very much related to what we are talking now, and it is about education. Why it matters so much, education, to sustainable trade?
So, yes, why it matters? Because education actually, it's both a means and an end. It is an element that increases awareness, increases understanding. At the second level, what it does is it increases the capacity to, for instance, for producers to start using more environmentally sensitive production processes, creating an environment where the products will be more in tune with certain sustainability goals. And finally, education allows potentially, what we were discussing before, to introduce technologies that will allow the further increase of both the feasibility, but most importantly, the sustainability of what a country produces.
Let's talk about environment. The index shows that top ranks are occupied by countries that uphold high environmental standards, right?
Yes.
Like how it deals to waste, water, air pollution, carbs. Could you take a look again and tell us which countries are doing great regarding environment?
The ones that we saw before, actually. New Zealand, United Kingdom, Mexico, and let's remember that measuring all these aspects is a little bit tricky sometimes, because part of what we try to measure is not only who produces emissions, for instance, but also who consumes emissions. And that's why the ecological footprint and the transfer of the trade transfer of emissions are very, very important components in our thinking. So these are countries that have strict regulations, that adhere with the regulations that they have, and they try to promote a way of producing more environmentally friendly goods.
We see, if we look in the environmental pillar, China has a performance pretty much like similar to Canada, and Russia is in the last position. It's zero.
Yes, because it's like, yes.
Yes. Is there any explanation why is that?
Yes, it is. First of all, the 0 and the 100 is we normalize the values, right? So every ranking, it goes from 0, that is the lowest performing country, to 100, which is the best performing country, only in order to be able to compare the positions with each of the pillars and with the previous years. However, why does Russia perform poorly? Well, because if you think about the exports of Russia, are all, they're very much related with non-renewable natural resources, which essentially is something that we know countries must take into consideration. And this is the main reason. And the other reason is because they have very low environmental standards in the different processes.
Okay, and according to the index, when we take a look, and if we take a look on natural resources, countries and economies, they should or they shouldn't depend much on that in their natural resources. What index show us? What the findings show to us?
That's a fair question, and it's a very big issue, and we know that not only students of environmental issues are struggling with us, but also policymakers are struggling with that. So the quick answer is, of course, no. They cannot. They should not rely very much on that. And if we have to make the distinction between renewable natural resources, energy from solar energy or wind energy. This is not, it's a renewable resource, right?
So it's not considered natural resources because it's a renewable.
It is a renewable natural resource.
Okay, right? So it's not part of what we are talking about.
It's not part of what we're talking about. What we're talking about is the non-renewable natural resources.
Something that companies or governments, they take from the earth, and it's not replaceable.
Exactly, it's not replaceable, and it is finite. So we have, of course, technology that helps us and allows us to get more and more sources of these non-renewable natural resources, yet we know that in the end, they are finite. And therefore, what economies that rely heavily on that, without any other plan, essentially what they do is they deplete a source of well-being that they have. And therefore, what they do is they move more and more in the area that they're not going to have enough to sell.
Mm-hmm.
So you cannot, it is not something that you can rely constantly on that. We see, for instance, we do not have them in our ranking, but we know many countries, think about Middle East, where many of these countries, what they try to do, and they have put a lot of effort, is to find ways to diversify their economies, because so far they were working mainly with a non-renewable resource they have with oil, fossil fuel. So this is the setup.
So is it accurate to say that the Sustainable Trade Index shows that the way or the right way to do regarding natural resources is to invest more and more in renewable sources, natural sources?
Absolutely. So moving forward, we hope that we will see more and more economies, more that they will invest and they will start operate with renewable sources. It's not easy, and it's not something that but it's definitely one way that we are expecting to move forward. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And let me take a step back and try to bring some of the issues that we were discussing before. Before we were discussing about the value supply chains.
Mm-hmm.
So we have supply chains which may use a lot of non-renewable resources. Therefore, a sustainable supply chain will be one that will use renewable sources of energy in order to transfer the different goods.
Okay, so I assume that this is one of the challenges for all countries, all economies that are part of the index. But if we take a look now, particularly, Christos, in Asia, what are the main challenges there on Asia's supply chain?
I think the Asia supply chain, the challenges in the Asia supply chain stem from what we were discussing before. The fact that is that there was a very big change of the environment within which these chains were operating from 2016, 2017 until now. So before that, essentially the main objective of the countries, the main objective mainly of the enterprises was to find the lowest cost producing area, and then they were producing different materials that were needed in their goods in the lowest cost areas. This has changed. This has changed both because some of these economies started becoming more wealthy, China, for instance, and it has also changed because of the issues related that we found that were related with a pandemic, where there were delays and very, very high costs of transporting goods, and then with the geopolitical issues. So many companies started bringing back a lot of these production units within their own territory or within economies that they were more allied, more friendly with them. And this has changed them up. And at the same time, we were discussing before, right? I mean, this allowed other economies from within Asia to actually improve. Vietnam was one. Malaysia started getting into the semiconductor industry, if I'm not mistaken. Indonesia, the same. Thailand, starting focusing on different manufacturing areas. So what we see is not necessarily that Asia has tremendous problems, but there is a rebalancing of the areas that are used and refocus from some economies what are the strategic objectives that they have now.
Interesting. This rebalancing, if it's focused on friendship or which country is more aligned with country one or two, from your perspective, is this a good thing to do in order to rebalance those relations?
If we take a step back, I think we can recognize that there are not many economies that can be self-sufficient. So that we don't have economies nowadays that by themselves, they can satisfy the demand of the citizens they have, which means that obviously you will have a relationship. Now, having a relationship with a country that is considered closer, and therefore, what does that mean? That these two countries align a lot with respect to certain beliefs, certain ways of performing issues, stronger relationship, not antagonistic. It is, for these countries, a way to be able to continue the relationship that they had before with other countries.
Can we
China and United States,
yes,
we saw that they were in a lot of tension the last few years. So a lot is going to be dependent upon what is happening in November in the United States with the elections, and how will the new government in 2025 will start implementing different issues. We have already been exposed on countries that they promote industrial policies which are very much inward looking. The Inflation Reduction Act, the Chips and Science Act in United States followed essentially the different legal frameworks, the industrial policies that China had for many years. And then you see that another pillar, another pole in this world, the European Union, also started performing, instituting industrial policies that are also, in some respect, they try to safeguard the national security in the sense that they try to create different non-tariff barriers, right? So yes, this is how I think we'll see navigating the whole issue, and the way that we will move forward really depends a lot on what's going to happen next in the United States.
You already entered in a region I would ask you next, which is Americas, and you already spoke about United States and gave your impression of how, for example, the result of the elections here, I'm in Washington, D.C., so what the result is going to be in November and how it's going to affect the economy here, trade, and around the world. So, but now focusing on the index numbers, if we look into the North America and in South America, how those countries are going in comparison with the rest of the world, of the countries that are analyzed in this index, Christos, in the North and South America. In South, if I am not wrong, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I saw Peru and Chile, is that correct?
So in the South, we have economies which are developing. They have many different challenges that they face. and they try to navigate, they try to address in different ways economic issues. They try to address issues related to the workings of the economy. Corruption is one. How you can institute non-tariff barriers, so subsidies that are provided, which basically change the value of different things and also provide signals that are not correct with respect to what entrepreneurs should go and what producers should produce. So it is very, very different. Of course, in United States, we have a lot of subsidies. In fact, what we see now is an attempt, precisely because of national security issues, the attempt of trying to safeguarding industries like the semiconductor industry or the renewable energy industry. These are starting to trying to find ways to be built within United States territory. And this will alter the map that we knew. So yes, there is a lot of difference between North America, and I include Mexico in the North America, and the South American countries, which are based on the general economic framework that they have.
If we look into the South American countries, you spoke about corruption, which is something that many countries there face. And if we look into the societal pillar, when you were explaining in your presentation at the beginning, you spoke very well about challenges that countries that are not performing so well in this pillar, societal, they face, and you gave some examples. You didn't say corruption in that moment, but you said about new human slavery, and how the governments are dealing with human traffic. Is this something that countries in Asia, for example, they face a problem, this type of problem, more than other countries in other parts of the world?
Yes, if I'm not mistaken, this is absolutely correct. But it is a problem that many countries try to address. And each year we see more and more efforts towards how you can try to actually minimize this very problematic situation. In essence, modern slavery, which is an umbrella term that tries to capture of recruiting or harboring or transporting people by use of force, fraud, or coercion. So indeed, we can see a lot of these issues in the countries that you mentioned. On the other hand, and this is very, very important, it is also it's of crucial importance that through the trade, developed economies are trying to see through some of these things and therefore not accept the goods that may be they cost much lower than other goods that involve modern slavery parts in producing them.
Perfect, Christos. Thank you so much for joining us today. All the data and information and numbers of this index, they are available at the Association of Foreign Press Correspondents in the USA website. Do you want to share anything else with our audience that are here with us? Anything regarding the content of this index and how they can reach out, and maybe with some more questions?
Yeah, I would like to thank you once again for this tremendous privilege to talk with you. I enjoyed our conversation very, very much. It's a difficult area because, as we said in the beginning, there is a huge trade-off among the pillars. And what we try to show is how can one navigate these trade-offs? And there is a lot of work to be done. And I'm very, very happy that I'm part of the team that produces this Sustainable Trade Index. Thank you very much, Patricia.
Thank you so much. I spoke with Christos Cabolis, the chief economist at the IMD World Competitiveness Center. He's also the head of operations at IMD and an adjunct professor of economics and competitiveness. This educational program was developed in partnership with Hinrich Foundation. Thank you all for being with us. See you next time. Bye.